Hi, I'm John Atack,
I'm Sam Atack.
and we're going to talk about prog,
Yeah.
progressive rock, which I grew up with.
Yeah, me too.
Didn't I? Yeah, he did too. Amazing. Progressive rock was a movement that is almost exclusively in its origins a British form of music. And there are bands that contributed to its origins, and among them is Jimi Hendrix, who came from Seattle. Yeah. In October 1968, he released Electric Ladyland, and as soon as his producer up until then, Chas Chandler, had gone off in a tiff, annoyed with him, he sat down and produced one of the great pieces of prog rock, which is not necessarily thought of as prog rock, which is 1983, A Moment I Shall Turn to Be, and Moon Turn the Tides Gently, Gently Away. And it is a beautiful and remarkable piece that should be listened to either in a quiet room on a good system or with good headphones. Very, very beautiful. Pink Floyd would come into, they're at the beginnings of this. They record in April 1967. They're in the studio next door at Abbey Road to the Beatles, recording Piper at the Gates of Dawn. I would say, to get a sense of how they contributed to the beginnings of this music, that the live recording, the live sessions for the album Ummagumma, released in 1969, which have Set the Controls for the Heart of the Sun and Astronomy Domini and Careful with That Axe Eugene and Source Full of Secrets, these four pieces. They were the first name band that I saw. I was 14. It was the 14th of February, Valentine's Day, 1970 at Birmingham Town Hall, and they played all four of those pieces, and it was mind-boggling. The origins of prog, where in the United States you've got a lot of jazz influences coming into music, incredibly brilliant players who are affecting the way that rock music will develop. I mean, in terms of kind of pop rock, you've got Chicago, and the Chicago Transit Authority is still one of the great achievements of music. You've also got Blood, Sweat and Tears with the Bracco Brothers and Bobby Columby and Steve Katz. Quite remarkable music, but a kind of pop music. What happened in the UK mainly, and we are going to talk about an exception that has its origins in Canada in a moment, was a unification not of jazz school musicians who were then playing pop or rock music, but of classically trained musicians. So Robert Fripp, Andy Summers of the Police, Robert Fripp of King Crimson, Andy Summers of the Police, and Greg Lake, originally in King Crimson and then in Emerson, Lake and Palmer, they were actually all taught guitar by the same man in Wimborne, Dorset. And he had them playing Paganini violin pieces, which are held to be virtually impossible, on guitar. And it shows. Rick Wakeman, he of the silly hair and beer and curry and Christian belief, nonetheless was a classically trained musician. Steve in Yes. Steve Howe, the guitar player, has a training both as a classical guitarist and as a rag guitarist, playing blues rags, and quite remarkable virtuoso. Bill Bruford, the original drummer with Yes, was a jazz drummer, who, because there are no classical drum kits, and though you will occasionally find, I think Billy Cobham actually has something like a classical training because he was in the army, so he learned to play from sheet music and to play all the paradiddles and things on a snare drum. But you basically have a group of kids who come along and they're listening to, the Beatles and all of this stuff, the Rolling Stones, but their chops are way more developed. Much as we love Keith Richards with his 5-string guitar and his flattened finger and his incredible songwriting ability, he's a fairly simple player and very effective. These guys were capable of tremendous flights of fancy. Keith Emerson, whose band, the original band, was The Nice. You go off and listen to their version of Bernstein's America from West Side Story. Da 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 da. America is pregnant with promise and anticipation, but is murdered by the hand of the inevitable, is what the child says in the middle of the piece, which could be true, if I knew what it meant. Said I was going to talk about one exception from Canada, and that exception from Canada is a man called Don Gallucci. Who? And he was a member of a group, I think they were called the Kingsmen, and they had a hit, I think fairly locally. I don't think they had the international hit with a song which the Kinks recorded as Louie Louie, but which has also been sung as Louie Louie.
Oh, okay.
A bit confusing. He was 15 at the time, and he couldn't go on tour with them because he was at school. So a little bit later, he turns up in Los Angeles in 1968 and creates a band called Touch. And of all of the pieces missing from the history of progressive rock, this is the most important one, as far as I know. You know, there could be something I don't know about that has happened before, once or twice, a few thousand times. And what they did was to take an approach to classical music. Now, it took me years. It was years after I was listening to this music that I realised that these guys were listening to late 19th, early 20th century music. So when Yes came onto the stage, they would play The Firebird by Stravinsky. It is evident that King Crimson are influenced by Bartok, Bela Bartok, and the original King Crimson used to play Mars, a piece from the Planet Suite written by Holst, sometime just before the First World War. So in their training, they've heard this music, and this music, these pieces are called tone poems. 19th century, early 20th century, Sibelius is another of the great masters of the tone poem. Which we recommend, Tapiola, maybe, or a lot of people like Finlandia, I suppose. It's the one piece it jars with me a little bit. It's got incredible harsh horns. That's really quite cool. They were also listening to orchestral songs, where, you know, and again, Elgar's Sea Pictures would be a wonderful example of this. That was what converted me to being able to listen to the operatic style of singing, but it was Dame Janet Baker I was listening to, and I recommend her version of everything.
Yeah.
But those songs, that idea of, rather than having an aria, which is part of an opera where somebody sings a piece within a narrative, rather than having a cantata, which is where there are some pieces of a religious nature that fit together, or a mass, or this kind of thing, the orchestral Leda, is that the right pronunciation? The orchestral songs. And Spike's going to get in on this hopefully and do her own piece. Spike, do your own piece about this. You know so much more about this than I do. Spike has a master's in composition for anybody who wasn't aware of that. I don't have any qualification of any kind whatsoever.
Yeah.
Beyond the ability to stand on a soapbox and pronounce, which I'm quite good at.
And listen to lots of stuff.
And listen to lots of stuff and be able to drop names. Too much stuff. So you have these wonderful orchestral songs, and when you listen to the extended pieces that would be called progressive rock, that's where they're coming from. What's happened is the blues rock tradition that's come up, you know, from Charlie Patton, Son House, Robert Johnson, Tommy Johnson, Lonnie Johnson, the Mississippi Shakes, all of these wonderful things that came out of the Mississippi, so-called Mississippi Delta. That music became the electric blues with Muddy Waters, Howlin' Wolf, Sonny Boy Williamson II, Rice Miller, and Hubert Sumlin playing guitar for the Wolf. That music then, with Chuck Berry, becomes rhythm and blues, and people like Little Richard will cross the music over so that it'll be picked up by Elvis and other people and become rock and roll. That music then develops into the blues rock. People like John Mayall, particularly. Blues from Laurel Canyon, fantastic album. Absolutely recommend that. Mick Taylor, who left the band to join the Rolling Stones. Colin Allen playing drums on that album. unbelievable. All of these things are moving towards an incorporation into this new form, this prog rock. And Don Gallucci, in 1968, in Los Angeles, creates a band called Touch. They'll record on the Decca DRAM label. And the album comes out early in 69, around about the same time as Led Zeppelin 1, which also has some proto-prog on it, you know, Dazed and Confused and How Many More Times are these sort of extended pieces where we actually find a quotation from Ravel's Bolero, which Hendrix has used already and which Jeff Beck would use on the wonderful album Truth. Gallucci takes this, and he and the incredible band, one of the great singers, I think comparable probably to Jeff Buckley in the 90s, a phenomenal guitar sound, a really solid drum sound, and they make this great album called Touch. Hendrix goes into the studios while they're recording it, and they tell him that they've run out of money, and he says, "I'll fund it." Mick Jagger walks through the studios and takes their recording engineer, who will make Beggar's Banquet, the first properly recorded Rolling Stones album, and also a very fine album. Led Zeppelin will record Led Zeppelin 2 in the studio to try and get that sound. So they had a tremendous influence. John Anderson of Yes said that Yes changed direction into prog, having heard this. So if you listen to the Yes album, which, you know, that is tremendously influenced by Touch. And the Touch album is still, particularly the track 75, or The Spiritual Death of Howard Greer. These are remarkable pieces of music. Prog is usually, the beginnings of it are usually put with King Crimson, the Court of the Crimson King. King Crimson, I saw their first TV performance, which I think was in very early 69. It was on a show called Colour Me Pop.
Cool.
And they weren't called King Crimson yet. They were called Giles, and Fripp, after the Giles brothers, oddly enough, and Robert Fripp. And I only saw it once, but I've never forgotten the song. Do you want me to sing it for you?
Let's do it together.
Kisses don't get better, they get wetter and wetter. I cursed the day I met her, but she is loaded.
Yeah.
He doesn't know this song.
I did know the song.
He did,
until that moment.
Until he tried to sing it.
Yeah.
But we anticipate that this recording will go to number 1 in the charts.
Let's hope so.
A few months later, at the Hyde Park concert, backing the Rolling Stones, well, Mick Jagger casually crushed Cabbage White Butterflies had been released because, you know, to say something about the death of Brian Jones, the word suke meaning soul or butterfly, I think somebody was trying to be clever. So they released all of these things and they all got trouble
messed up.
It was a bit messed up, but it's still a good gig and you can see it.
Okay.
The backing band, the support that day was King Crimson. And you corrected me in the other, and you were quite right, in the other video saying that, in fact, Robert Fripp was told that Jimi Hendrix had said when he saw King Crimson, they were the best band in the world. And they probably were. So the Court of the Crimson King burst upon us all. It was very short because Holst's widow, so I'm told, had refused permission for them to put the track Mars on it. So they snuck it into In the Wake of Poseidon, the next album. King Crimson would go through many variants. I think Fripp reckons there have been about 23 different King Crimsons and would explore many things. The only common member being the wonderful guitar player Robert Fripp, who, you know, they made Court of the Crimson King. We'll probably do a detailed video about King Crimson. And toured the US, were massively successful, and then Greg Lake, the singer and bass player, left to join Emerson, Lake and Palmer, one of the other early prog bands. I saw their second gig, the Bath Festival in June 1970. I think that's right. And they were very good then, and deteriorated from that point onwards, as far as I'm concerned. And the drummer, Mike Giles, one of the most, I'm a drummer, I've played for 50 years, one of the most remarkable drummers in history, Michael Giles. And did very bits and pieces with other things. And Ian MacDonald, the keyboard player and sax player, they all left, basically leaving Robert Fripp and the lyricist and light show guy Pete Sinfield, who was a great lyricist, to somehow carry on, which they managed to do. In the same way that Pink Floyd had to somehow carry on without their frontman, Sid Barrett, their singer, songwriter, guitar player. But they got lucky. They got David Gilmour, and Waters started writing. The songs that Pink Floyd are largely known for are songs that he wrote. Though Gilmour and Rick Wright contributed to some of them. You then have this sort of flowering. You have Genesis, and I would say, Selling England by the Pound is probably a perfect moment in history. Peter Gabriel will continue and make The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, and then he leaves and starts a solo career. And Genesis move towards being a pop band from having been a progressive band. You have the band Camel, wonderful album Moon Madness. Absolutely recommend that. Very beautiful. There's the Snow Goose as well by them, which is rather good. Gentle Giant. And here we find a band who are not only incorporating strains of the music of the late 19th and early 20th century, they're also reaching back into the polyphony of the 16th century. So you find them doing these wonderful vocal things with 5 voices going on. Incredible musicianship. Very strange time signatures. That's one of the things that most pop music is in 2 or 4. You might occasionally get a waltz time or 3. These bands are quite happy to play an 11 time, or 10 time, or what have you. We also have Jethro Tull and Ian Anderson. I saw Tull, they played before Hendrix at the Isle of Wight in August 1970, and they were unbelievable. You can find online their performance there, and I think the song is called My God. And Ian Anderson, he said, there are too many guitar players, so he learned to play the flute, and he is the Jimi Hendrix of the flute.
Yeah.
A disciple of Roland Kirk, I think, but just astonishing
the sounds
expression.
He makes while playing it as well, which is just fantastic. And the whole thing, the presence he manages to get in that performance.
Standing on one leg.
Yeah.
Oh!
Yeah.
Now, he said that Thick as a Brick, which is the album we're going to recommend as a prog album, he was actually taking the mickey out of prog rock. His influences included folk music, traditional music, and on albums like Heavy Horses, for example, you find him working with that. But all of the albums leading up to that, this was the first album, which is a kind of blues rock album with jazz elements, very competently played, and I revere the drummer Clive Bunker. It's a terrible shame that he didn't become fantastically wealthy and make 100 albums, but he didn't. I think he ended up as a window cleaner. Oh, this is what we do to our heroes. That Thick as a Brick is a real statement about life on planet Earth. It's a fantastic lyric. It's a series of lyrics. They were lucky enough, Ian Anderson has said, that Led Zeppelin picked them up to be their backing band on a US tour, so they became quite well known out of that. Add then to that, I see, prog develops through, yes, they become the most successful of all of the prog bands financially, particularly with the album Fragile, which was actually their 4th album. The first albums, Yes, Time and a Word, and are not much listened to, and I don't listen to them. The Yes album, the 3rd album, was, for me as a 15-year-old, the most influential piece of music, because there was no way I could do what Mike Giles was doing on Chord of the Crimson King. I can pretty much do it now. But Bruford, who was equally competent, somehow I managed to find my way through that. And for 10 years, he was the drummer I was listening to, and those were things. And there's a progression. There's the Yes album with Yours Is No Disgrace and Starship Trooper on it. Then Fragile with Heart of the Sunrise and Long Distance Run Around. And then we have Close to the Edge. And Close to the Edge is almost a perfect 1900 orchestral series of orchestral songs. I think Siberian Katru is for me still the most interesting piece. You then have Tales from Topographic Oceans, which is a bit weird but extremely worth the time. And then for me the pinnacle of this period, which is Relayer, where they replace Rick Wakeman with I think he's Swiss, Patrick Moraz, playing keyboards, and somehow this astonishingly complex and beautiful fusion occurs. For me, there's a kind of deterioration, if you like, that the prog music then, around 74, 75, they're seeing serious competition from jazz rock. Chick Corea, Herbie Hancock, Weather Report, and for me, most of all, the Mahavishnu Orchestra with John McLaughlin. And they're doing impossible things, but they're pushing back to jazz, though accepting certain elements of prog. I mean, again, among the prog bands, there's a jazz prog band, which is Colosseum, led by the drummer John Heisman, and originally with the guitar player, singer James Litherland, whose hand I had the pleasure to shake 20 years ago. Fantastic singer. His song Elegy, Colosseum, which I think is on the Valentine suite, or Walking in the Park, which is a Graham Bond song that they used to do. So you have an incredible jazz saxophonist, Dick Hexel-Smith, and they would then, very good bass player as well, they would then take in Clem Clemson, who grew up 3 miles away from where I grew up, but that's as close as I ever got to him, who'd come out of his own band Bakerloo, and is one of the great guitar players. There's no doubt about it. He's one of Jack Bruce's favourite guitar players. And what's his name? Chris Thingy, the singer. Oh no, it's just that point, isn't it? Who had a hit with Stormy Monday, and he said some guy came up to him and said, "Oh, you're the second person I know with that name, because there's the black guy that did Stormy Monday." He said, "I am that black guy." Their stuff, Daughter of Time, is absolutely phenomenal and worth listening to, and their albums, when they reformed, that doesn't mean they stopped committing criminal acts, but it means when they came back together again, are also extremely good. I saw them in 2004 or something, just after Dick Hexel-Smith, the saxophonist, had passed away. They did a song called 70, and he was exactly 70 when he passed away, so that proved to be prophetic. And John Heisman's wife, Barbara Thompson, of Paraphernalia, played saxes that night, and she was on meds for her multiple sclerosis, so she could do it, and she had to do the 2 saxophones at once, which was the Dick Hexel-Smith speciality.
Okay, cool.
Remarkable people. But there's a sort of fading out. These bands either move towards pop music, like Genesis, yes, to some extent, with Going for the One. I think Awaken on there is their last piece of prog, and then they'll come back over the years, but they're doing things that are more sort of poppy, more rock orientated. And there's a final flowering in a French band, Anglo-French band called Gong, and there are 2 forms of gong. There's the Steve Hillage gong, the original one with Camembert Electrique, which I don't really listen to. Then the drummer called Pierre Merlin takes the band over, and he manages to get Alan Holdsworth to play guitar. And I absolutely recommend the album Gazeuse, which is, you've got basically a drummer and 4 other percussionists, a bass player, a sax player, and a guitar player, and it's just beautiful. And it has one of the greatest drum solos, and even though I'm a drummer, I particularly like drum solos. They just seem to be, showing off and hitting things. And but this is a very musical solo. And that would lead us to, and we are coming to the end of this particular homily. That would lead us to the band UK. After the split of there was a wonderful King Crimson that recorded Lark's Tongues and Aspic, Starless and Red, these 3 albums. And they had less and less members, album by album. I think Fripp was executing the members. Jamie Muir, who was the incredible percussionist on the first album, Lark's Tongues, became a Tibetan monk.
Okay.
That's what Robert Fripp did to him.
Yeah.
Then David Cross, the really good violinist, was sacked from the band and stopped talking to Robert Fripp, which Robert Fripp was a bit upset about, because he said he was one of the few people he played with that he actually developed a real friendship with, he felt. But then the management, it was decided he'd got to go, and Fripp wanted to tell him, and the management said, no, we'll do it. And that didn't work out very well, according to a Fripp interview. They split up, and the bass player and singer, the astonishing John Wetton, who'd been with the wonderful Family, who are also a kind of semi-prog band, and well worth listening to. Incredible band in all of the various incarnations, all with Roger Chapman singing. But Wetton there's a track called My Friend the Sun. It's the album called Reckless or something, I can't remember. But this track, both Wetton and Chapman sing, and it's wonderful. My Friend the Sun. But Wetton and Bruford get back together and form the last of the early prog bands, if you like. Since then we've had the Flower Kings, the Mars Volta, Spock's Beard, what's his face, that Gavin Harrison played, Porcupine Tree. Lots of really interesting bands, none of whom particularly catch my attention. It's just that way. I mean, it's not a matter. There's no, this is better than that. Yeah. Art doesn't work that way. This is what I like. This is what touches me. It doesn't mean, if you have Stockhausen syndrome, then good luck to you. Go and listen to it. Bing, 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 bing.
Oh yeah, that was beautiful.
It moved me. Yeah. Or John Cage, Though the Rehearsal, as Jermaine Greer.
It's great music.
Silence was better. Yeah. I'm going to put the lid down on the piano. That's so much better. These things have their value and their virtue and their admirers, and good luck to them. So the last band we're going to talk about is UK. And UK formed, I think, in 1978. I was at art college back then. I went and saw them. I had Bill Bruford playing drums. Yes. John Wetton, vocals and bass. Incredible voice. Very good bass player too. Eddie Jobson, who'd just come out of Frank Zappa's band, the Mothers of Invention, playing keyboards and violin. Quite a remarkable violinist. And Alan Holdsworth playing guitar. Same player who was on Gone Gazers, I think in the same year. And I was so impressed by the gig that I got tickets for a gig in another town 3 days later, so that I could go and see them. And I actually shook Bill Bruford's hand and got his autograph. It's the only time I've ever asked anybody for an autograph. I've still got it somewhere. They were remarkable. They made one album, and then Holdsworth, Bruford left, and a new band formed with Terry Bozzio playing drums, who's a phenomenal drummer. But somehow it didn't have that thing. Dig out that first UK album, it has Alaska and In the Dead of Night on it. So that's our top 30, whatever it's going to be. We're going to call it a top 10 or a top 20, because we can't count properly.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And I hope you'll be able to go out and find some of these tracks, some of these albums. I'd especially, again, urge listening to the Touch album with Don Vellucci and 75 and The Spiritual Death of Howard Greer down at Circe's place, because it is astonishing. It stands out. But everything else we talked about is very definitely worth everything else I've talked about.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's be honest about this. But doesn't
Yeah,
it go on?
let's do it.
All right, tell them your impression. We went and saw King Crimson as an 8-piece with 3 drummers in November 2018. How was that?
Wasn't very good, really.
Try again.
No, it was absolutely fantastic. They just came on, started playing, and it was amazing.
Yeah. No support band, no messing around.
Yeah.
2
7
sets.
people.
Nobody's allowed to take photographs, as Robert Fripp said.
We tried to take a photograph of the sign that said that.
Yeah,
I
think we do somewhere have a
Oh, good.
probably a photograph of a sign saying take no photographs. You could do them after the gig, at which point Tony Levin, the astonishing double bass player, who's also, of course, in most of Peter Gabriel's bands and played with Paul Simon. He's on One Trick Pony. He's in the film One Trick Pony, and is amazing.
Yeah.
And again, if we were going to extend this, we would talk about Peter Gabriel, whose albums, are a continuation of prog, but we're not going to.
No.
But if King Crimson are anywhere near you, then pay the money.
It's worth the money.
It's well worth it. They are incredible. Mel Collins' sax playing alone is worth it. But seeing three drummers doing these amazing things, and the legendary, the saint, Robert Fripp.
Yeah, the only member of the band that we didn't have a good view of.
Well, nobody does. And there was a point where he almost smiled once.
Yeah, that was fantastic.
But you can see him and his wife, Toya Wilcox, on YouTube performing Swan Lake.
Yeah.
Which is extremely odd. And shows that they're incredibly serious, studious people.
Yeah.
And so enjoy. Go out and listen to this stuff. We'll talk about the blues, and we'll talk about jazz. We'll talk about swing. We'll talk about Sibelius. We'll talk about
Bebop.
Joni Mitchell. We'll talk about so many things that you wouldn't believe it. But we're not going to do it now.
Ooh, country music?
Yeah, sure. Why not? We'll talk about bluegrass and some of the incredible things there, and about what's his name, T-Bone Burnett, and his astonishing Emmylou Harris. I was talking to a friend last night who actually was talking to Emmylou Harris earlier this year. He sat in the room with Emmylou Harris. Imagine that. Superstars. Well, that's all I have to say about that. Thanks so much for your time. It's been a great pleasure spending time with you, and I hope you feel the same, because otherwise we're in real trouble. And we'll meet again. Don't know where, don't know when, but Vera Lynn has actually popped her clogs, aged, 2003 or something. Yeah, she's died this year. The Force's sweetheart, as she was known in World War II. And always kind of admired her, but I'm not so keen on the songs, because they're songs about being happy about going off and being killed.
Oh.
And being killed's not good for you.
No, doesn't help.
Very disturbing. Thank you very much, and I've already said that's all we have to say about that. That's my first.
Let's say it again.
That's all I have to say about that.
Yeah.
I'm John Atack.
I'm Sam Atack.
Thanks a lot. Kisses don't get better, they just get wetter and wetter. I cursed the day I met her, but she is loaded.
Yeah.
He doesn't know this
I don't.
song.
I did know.